Robert Krulwich, welcome to The Public.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a great delight to have you on. I'm a big fan of your work. Now, we're doing the series where we sort of go behind the mic and get to meet a lot of the people we know from public radio, the voices of public radio. Now, there seems to be two camps that people divide into when we talk to them about their sort of attraction to broadcasting. You know, those people who came to it quite late in life. It had never occurred to them. It wasn't this thing that they romanticized early on. And then there's another camp of people who seem to have this attraction to it early on. And it sounds like you are in that latter camp. Can you tell me about Don Roberto?
Don Roberto was my pseudonym for, I was probably 6 or 5, and I would be in the bathtub. And I don't know why this happened, because I think maybe I just watched Walter Cronkite in the United States on the news, and maybe he seemed very glamorous to me. I didn't know any reporters. I had no reporters in my family or anything like that. But when it was time to take a bath and my mom would leave me alone, I would take my fist, turn it into a microphone, and then I would begin a broadcast. And I had a signature, which was, around the world, around the nation, around the corner, this is the news that's making the news. I'm Don Roberto. And I would talk about myself. And I would aim my gaze at the chrome right around the faucet in the bathtub. So yes, I had a very early start. I was apparently an international TV star before I even went to school. And then I kept broadcasting all the time. So when I got Soldiers, I remember having friends come over, and I would take my hamster and put her into the coronation carriage of Queen Elizabeth that some kid downstairs had. And then she would get free, being a hamster after all. She didn't know that she was supposed to be Queen Elizabeth. And she would rampage, and then I would be the helicopter reporter above, and we would get ambulances to the various scenes. And it was always, and then when I was even like in an embarrassingly old age, like 14 and 15, we would stage election nights for phantom countries. And all my friends would line up and be at the various desks. So I had a very, I think the form of play that I had for some reason was very like, let's pretend we're on television or on radio. And I was also an avid radio listener, for sure.
Even as a kid?
Oh, yeah. Because when transistor radios came in, the baseball teams in New York City where I grew up left town, some of them, and they would then their games would be rebroadcast or simulcast was the phrase, by a guy named Les Kiter. It was called recreated baseball. But what he would do is he'd sit by a ticker tape in New York, and each pitch and each swing or non-swing was recorded, and then he would make it up. He would he would hit the microphone with his pencil, and
he was pretending he was seeing the live game.
He was seeing the live game, and I found that more interesting than actually going to the live game, creating a confusion in my mind about truth and falsity. But
did you know that? Did people know that it was?
Well, it was called recreated baseball, but I didn't really care that much. I love the fact that he would describe the wind and the crowds, all making the entire thing up, and. So I think by the time I got to college, where I did do a college radio program.
At Oberlin.
I think then I was sort of dabbling with it, but I never thought I would do it. That was never. I sought to kill a mockingbird, and I was going to be a lawyer.
Well, I want to come back to that, but so first, did you watch a lot of television with your parents too? Because it sounds like a lot of it was also informed by sort of the broadcast news type influence.
Well, my parents, I think at that time, in the 50s and 60s, there was just a tremendous amount of going home at dinner time and watching the news after or during or before. And I don't remember having a very ceremonial habit of watching the news, but I think I certainly saw the news. And when there were big events, funerals, Winston Churchill's funeral, presidential funerals, the Kennedy assassination, all of the moonshots and so on, then those were very long sit at the television set things, and I was totally into that. And I would sometimes turn off the sound and take a pencil and then broadcast. I did the Eichmann trial play-by-play, even though I didn't speak German or Hebrew or anything. And I would just, it was a trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, and I sat with my friends and we would just do simulcast recordings of what we thought might be going on. I don't know what, that was like weird. I mean, we were Manhattan kids, which are not like normal people anywhere. Like we would do things, this is the kind of thing we would do. We would go on an afternoon when our football got run over by a car. We would then go and get poster board, staple gun it to sticks, which somebody had, like broomsticks, make up a word. The one word we hear was curbanism, a word which we agreed we would not define. And then we stood in front of the Guggenheim Museum in New York yelling, down with curbanism, going in an oval, which is what they made you do. The people from the museum came and said, what is curbanism? We had not agreed on what curbanism was. So everyone, my cousin Nancy, my sister, Billy Theodore, we'd all give different explanations of what curbanism is. Eventually, as was protocol then, they would provoke a fight. They would get us violent somehow by dragging my sister or something. And then they would then call the police and arrest us.
You guys would get arrested for this?
We only got arrested once in that case. We got arrested also when my sister put on a JFK for president poster, and we went into Central Park where you're not allowed to solicit, even for a candidate. So she was arrested. We did get arrested fairly often. My father was a very quiet tennis-playing person, could not understand where these children came from. And why would anybody protest a museum for a name that didn't even exist? And we couldn't even explain why. Like Billy Theodore, who was involved in that, when the policeman said, what do you think you're doing? He said, well, we're just exercising our constitutional rights or something. And he picked up Billy Theodore, the policeman did, by his shirt.
So this is your friend?
Yes. It was dangling in the air, and he said, don't get technical, which was our first introduction to constitutional law, I guess. But yes, we did get into trouble all the time. Because, like, one time we would go, like my cousin Jeff and I, we would go to the United Nations, which is like a big adult place. This is, again, before terrorism, before you couldn't do any of these things. And we would go in and we would go to the delegates lounge and we would speak phony foreign to get in. So we would approach the door and we go, and then the guards didn't know what that was. I figured we were delegates' children or something. So we'd go in, and then the game was like, Jeff would give me half a pile of paper and I would have the other pile. So we had two equal-sized piles of paper, and the game was, who could get rid of the paper first? And we would walk into the United Nations, like I wasn't the General Assembly, but it was the Economics and Trusteeship Council, which is, I don't know what they were. They were like adult people sitting behind signs. Jordan.
Is this like that main room we would see on TV?
Yeah.
You got your way into that main room.
And he was trying the other. We would just hit each delegate with a blank piece of paper. And as Jeff sped up, I would speed up. So there were these two boys going, whack it, all around this room. And then when we were done, we would argue in the delegates lounge about who had won, and we'd leave.
And you didn't even get caught.
In a normal town, what you'd do is you'd go out and you'd play soccer in the park. So we played lay the paper in front of the delegates in the big building on the East River game.
And you didn't get caught for that one?
We never got caught for anything. Well, until we got arrested a few times we had one called, the Democratic Party is very strong in New York City, and there was a group called Tammany Hall, it was called. It was just the political wing of the Democratic Party. And they had a big room in a fancy hotel across from the Plaza Hotel. They were on the third floor or fourth floor. And what it was there was a big corridor, and people who wanted to be judges and get political appointments would be hanging around in that corridor. And then there were courtrooms or there's some kind of chambers on the inside where the real powerful people were. So my friends and I would get dressed up in gray pants and blue sports jackets. So you all looked the same, like pages. And then we would get out of the elevator, and it was called Rounding the Adults. It was like shepherding. And we would just go up to them and say, excuse me, now it's time to go into the rooms. And there were like 80 people out there, and we would move all 80 people for no reason into these back rooms. And the rooms would be filled with people. They didn't know why they were there. And we just moved them all in, and then when the room was completely clean, we would high five and leave. That was the game. And it would be different amounts of time.
So like how fast you could get them shepherded into the room.
Get them, yeah. And we just did this over. We would go interview generals and on von Steuben Day and on Irish parades. We would interview the stars of the parade on the floats with microphones that went to our pockets and were not attached to any tape recorder.
And what would you say? Who were you?
We'd say, I'm from NBC. We were like 14. Like, we didn't look like we were from NBC. But we believed in lamination, which is very important. So we would write NBC a letter, like, Dear NBC, can I have tickets to the Ed Sullivan Show? Then they would write back, no. But they'd send you the envelope with the peacock in the corner.
So you have like the official notary now.
Yeah, so then we would take a scissors and we would cut around it. And so now we had a piece of paper with the peacock in the corner. And then I would go down to Art Brown's Supply, which only closed like last year. And you'd get something called letra set. This is before you could print things out. And you'd painstakingly rub A, B, C, in this case, Robert Krulwich, chief correspondent, usually spelled wrong.
Chief, you're already chief.
Of course, yes. And then we would put that on, and then we would put not one lamination, but triple lamination. At which point we thought with every lamination you gain like 5 years of age. So we went from being 15 to 20 to 20. We were now 30 years old. We had triple laminated credentials. And then we would go and interview. One time, this is the closest we ever got to real disaster. One time we were in the trailer. This was the night that Marilyn Monroe sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President. So it was at the Madison Square Garden. For some reason, Admiral Nimitz, these are all World War II figures, but very important in their day. Admiral Nimitz was in charge of the Pacific Fleet. So he pretty much fought the Japanese from Pearl Harbor all the way to the end, including everything, all the islands, the Philippines, everything, Indonesia. So he was a really amazing military man. But that night, he was the host of President Kennedy's event because Kennedy was in the Navy. And he was in a trailer, and I was Robert Krulwich, NBC News. I was like 14, and I had my microphone, and the cord came out of my pocket, so it was clear that I had no recording device. And instead of throwing us out, he had said, like, you're kind of young to be a news reporter. He just escorted us out and said, like, get out of here, you know. But I was kicked out of a trailer by one of the great war heroes of World War II. A lot of the times when these things would happen, it wasn't that I felt invulnerable, my father would have killed me. It was that I just thought that to some degree, if you're one of those snotty kids from New York City, like the city sort of exists as a plaything for you, and you can treat all of these important people as props in your own little game of, I don't know, your little drama about yourself. And that's a lot of what I did growing up, is I had lots of dramas. Even courting, I would fall in love with Broadway starlets. I mean, I would go to see a Broadway show, and I'd see, I remember there was...
How would you get in? Would you...
Well, I'd buy a ticket. My mom would take me to a show. I remember I see Oliver, and there was a girl, Alice Platon. She sang, "I'd do anything for you, dear, anything." I was like, oh, I loved Alice Platon from the balcony where we always sat. And I invented a boy who was in love with Alice Platon in Brooklyn, who had hired me, a courier, to give Alice Platon tokens of love. And then I would show up at the stage door at the Imperial Theater on 46th Street, say, I'm here for Alice Platon, and I have a thing from her friend Gregory, or whatever his name was. And we would go have coffee. We would talk about this crazy guy who wasn't so in love with her. She would laugh. I would laugh about
Really?
the guy. Yeah, there was no such guy. It was just me. So I did a lot of that. I was a completely crazy boy, in a way. But no harm ever came from it or anything. And my sister recovered from it nicely and is now a photographer for the New York Times. And one time we were at the Democratic National Convention. We had spent a great deal of time trying to get into Democrat. My mom was an alternate at some of them. So
What year would this have been?
Well, actually, I just saw a play about LBJ, and the second act of the play describes Martin Luther King and the Mississippi Freedom Party delegation on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. And they were trying to embarrass the party, which had not taken a lily white segregated group of people from Mississippi and was seating them as a delegation, so they were challenging that.
And this is like 60 or 64?
64. My sister and I at that time were trying to figure out whether dry ice would get us into that convention. We decided that no one would stand in the way of dry ice because it smokes. So we found a vendor of ice cream who said at the end of the day we could buy his dry ice for a certain sum of money, like $5. And we were waiting for his dry ice so that I could put it. I had bought a slicker, and we bought tongs so that the dry ice might slip off my back. And
Is it the dry ice that's like nitrogen or something,
yes,
right?
Yeah. And so our thought was that if we came to the door and we said, "Coming through, dry ice," that everybody would get out of our way. But while we were waiting, we were hanging out with Martin Luther King, Fannie Hamer and all these people from the Mississippi. So there was real American history going on right in front of us, right? We sat for hours with the Mississippi. And this whole play that I just saw on Broadway is all about what those people were talking about. But I said to my sister, we were actually there talking about dry ice and waiting for some Greek guy to give us, the ice for the $5. We didn't know what all these people were talking about exactly. So it would be like going to Pearl Harbor and missing the bombing and instead thinking about, crayons. Like we just didn't know what we were doing.
And what was your plan when you get in with dry ice?
Oh, then we were in. And then we would.
That was the goal.
The goal is always to get in. To get to where you're not allowed is always the goal. So here's what happened. So when we become real reporters, this is the whole denouement. This is why everything that happens after doesn't matter. It was so much fun dreaming of being a reporter and dreaming of getting into all these places and dreaming of having credentials and dreaming of all the romance of being a reporter that when we became that, when we both did, one day we were on the floor of the Democratic Convention. It was the one that nominated Jimmy Carter. And I was working for NPR. I had all these things, and my sister had cameras and we all had all the credentials. And we passed each other by and we stopped, and she said to me, "This isn't nearly as fun as the real thing."
Because you don't have the caper going on anymore.
Yeah, and the real thing for us was the pretend thing, and the pretend thing was better than what you and I would call now the real thing.
Were your parents at wit's end? Did they know a lot of the stuff you were getting in? I mean, obviously they knew when you got arrested.
I found it almost genetically mysterious that he would have children like this, since he was shy, quiet, a masterful athlete, and a sensible, regular man. Who told wonderful stories and was beloved by kids in all of our neighborhood, but would never have done any of these things. His father was very strict, and he had an older brother who was even stricter, for whom he worked. So he was living in a cage to some degree, and he had these two wild things in his house. And I don't think he minded us, but I think he felt that it was very unsafe for us to have these habits. My mother, who was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and found New York puzzling, didn't seem to mind as much. And when my sister got arrested for the JFK thing, she seemed almost proud, being the professional Democrat that she was. So I don't know. I know that my mother was the kind of person, and this is a different thing, but we'd be in Bloomingdale's or whatever, and she would get on the escalator to go up one flight. So what is that? It's a 25-second trip. And a total stranger would stand next to her with shopping bags. And, they'd meet silently. And by the time they got to the top of the one flight trip, the lady next to her would be saying, "No, I divorced him for exactly that reason. And if you would ask me again, I would do it again, the bum." And that they had somehow gotten from nothing to everything in 20 seconds. And that is a skill that both my sister and I can, in our interviews, we can get people talking pretty well. So that's the one thing that our mother gave us.
Well, it seems like you had such an enormous amount of confidence to be able to do these things as a kid. Do you have any idea of where that came from? Was that just sort of built in?
Have you ever seen these movies about these New York kids, these like Woody Allen kind of kids? Precocious, obnoxious, ridiculously self-confident, like strangely little adults in children form. Mm-hmm. That's what I was.
And do you think that came from being in the city, or is that just built into your genes?
All my friends were somewhat similar. Well, when I go to Tulsa for my cousins, everything about me was wrong. In fact, on Saturday nights, I would sit by myself in Tulsa. They used to have to get out of the way of tornadoes and things. They would, and also I think just to move water on certain occasions because it was dry on the plains. They'd have these culverts, and they'd run pipes in them behind houses. I would spend a lot of time just lying by myself in the culvert because my cousins and my friends from Tulsa just didn't know what to make of me. I mean, I could play softball and tennis and stuff like they did, but in the in-betweens, they would go for kind of joyrides in cars and eat ridiculous amounts of pizza.
So you both had all this energy built up, and you had drastically different ways of expending it.
Yes, yeah, and that was when I realized that being a New York kid is a queer thing to be. I would never have told them that I went to the UN and threw paper on They would have thought. They wouldn't have thought that was funny, and they wouldn't have thought it was cool, and they would have thought that there was something wrong with me.
But even to know about all these news events seems rather amazing. So like that takes quite an awareness to even know who these people are and know about the conventions.
I think maybe also growing up in Manhattan, I like one time. This is what my friends were like. One time we were standing in front of Loyola. President Kennedy comes with Mrs. Kennedy. They come in, they zip up the stairs, and we don't get to see them. So John, my friend John Coleman, he says, let's just go and pick him up on the other end. I said, where's the other end? He said, well, he's staying at and he knew the hotel. So apparently his dad owned this hotel. So that is President Kennedy's dad owned the hotel. So we went to this hotel, which was somewhere in Madison Avenue, and we sit in the lobby, and I'm scared. There's Secret Service agents everywhere. And the person comes over and says, who are you? And he says totally fluently, we're here to see my aunt, Anita Johnston. That's a T, Johnston, not Johnson, because you know what happened the last time. I don't know what he's talking about. What last time? He's just making this up because he's a fast kid. And so he goes up to and they say, well, there is no Anita Johnston. He says, let's not have this all over again. We're 13, right? Let's not have this all over again. And they're now defensive. Wait, where is it? And now we're getting things. They're looking for a person who doesn't exist. Somehow they think it's their fault. And then inevitably the door opens and there is President Kennedy. The President Kennedy standing there. His wife comes out and they're interviewing her. And he looks around and John turns and says, hello, Mr. President. I'm like, I thought at that moment I was going to drown. All of the saliva in my body went straight to my throat. And I thought I couldn't swallow because there was the president. There was a bush, or a lobby bush between me and him. And he looked over and he put his hand over the bush. And I thought, I'm going to drown in a dry lobby because I'm afraid to swallow. And then my hand began to sweat and I got scared that there would be a splat instead of a handshake. I was having so many problems. But no, John was like, hey, Mr. President, how you doing? And he said, hello, sir. Hello, young man. He said that to me. I actually was addressed by the President of the United States.
And you shook his hand.
I shook his hand, splatting slightly. Hello, young man is my role in history. Hello, young man. HELLOYOUNGMAN. 13 words. Letters, I mean.
It's not bad.
Not bad.
Would you brag about these two? Would you like
to you?
Well, I mean, would you tell your other friends? Would you tell your parents?
Yes.
You would tell your parents too?
I told them. Well,
or tell your
father? No, I wouldn't tell my father. I wouldn't think so. My mother adored President Kennedy, so yes, I'm sure I told her. I don't know. These things kept happening. When I was in college, I went to a convention which nominated, again, Dr. King, and this time Benjamin Spock, who was a baby doctor, very important at that time. And I, again, was reporting for nobody. I wanted to spend a weekend pretending to be a reporter, so I just went to this convention.
What convention is this?
It was called the New Politics Convention, and it was...
So like an alternative,
presidential one. So it was before the one in 1968 where the police had all those riots. It was 1967. It was also in Chicago, and I was still in college. For some reason, I decided that Oberlin was not a prestigious enough place for me to sign up for. I don't know why. So I signed up for the Yale Daily News. But two people behind me at the registration was the editor of the Yale Daily News, which was a real problem. His name was Strobe Talbot. So I wrote Robert Krulwich, Yale Daily News. And then I think, uh-oh. There's somebody who...
You saw their name badges or whatever.
Yes. In fact, in that moment. But I'd already signed it. So they're giving me this badge, Robert Krulwich, Yale Daily News, and I think, I then had to spend the entire next 3 days never being in the room with Strobe Talbot, which, because we were covering the same event, we were always in the same room, but I was always ducking into closets. And at one point, there was a Black Power event at this thing, maybe the first one. So the blacks self-segregated. So no whites allowed. So never having been a reporter, I decided that what a real reporter would do at that moment is they would hide in a linen closet. But there was a hardware closet. So I went out into the corner and I found the door and I get in and an older man says, I'm going in there with you. I said, who are you? He says, I'm so-and-so. I didn't catch it. I closed the door. And we then a guard, scary man, turns up on the corridor side. So now we're in this closet with scary people on both doors. The door we're listening through, so we can hear whatever it is they're saying, and the door we entered and could have escaped from, but no more. Now we're stuck in the closet. We're frightened, and it's totally dark. And it turns out this other guy is a guy named Homer Biggert, he was a New York Times reporter of enormous reputation. Then went to work with CBS, and was one of the great foreign correspondents, huge hero in World War II. He offers me a job and says, well, where do I reach you at Yale? And I just lied myself into a corner. I couldn't. I said, well, you can reach me here. And I made up some phone number in Connecticut, and I never saw the man again. So there were occasionally problems about pretending all the time. But I think that by the time I got to law school, I had a fairly extensive career in fantasy reporting.
You had already gone into more places than a seasoned reporter might have been.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a very strange way to begin.
So you go to Oberlin. You are obviously interested. So you worked in community radio at the campus?
Yeah. Yes, I had a show called the Krulwich Report, or the Krulwich Field Report, depending which of us was announcing it.
You had a partner?
I had a partner.
But it was only, his last name was Field.
John Field, yes. And so we also did odd things. When Simon and Garfunkel came, we pretended to be their chauffeurs and whisked them off to our house so that we could interview them. It was not an interview they had agreed to. And Art Garfunkel got really upset.
Right, you guys dressed up in jeans or whatever and just said...
We were always in jeans. We didn't have to dress up in it. But they didn't know why they were being... And when we said, well, we want to ask you... And then John was this was the 68 or something, so he wanted to know why Paul wasn't writing more anti-war songs. And Art was doing math. I think he was a math grad student or something. So they were not in the mood to be accused of being not politically correct or whatever. But we have that interview still. It's really an interesting one. So yeah, we did whatever it was we did.
This is once a week?
Yeah, once a week.
And you'd banter or you'd...
Oh, no, we would interview people. And I remember at one point I have a little bit of a problem with memorizing, so I could never be an actor or anything. I can't remember anything. And we had, in my Spanish class, there were dictados every morning. So you had to memorize. So I got an F every single day because I couldn't, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't. And the guy didn't know about learning disabilities. I don't think I knew about learning disabilities. I just thought I was like dumb, memorizing wise.
You think you had one?
Oh, I definitely do. I couldn't get into, I was trying to get into a special class in third grade, and was unable to memorize 6 times 6. I mean, my mother was like losing it because like, why can't you? It was, and I to this day.
A special class for gifted or ungifted?
No, well, I wanted to just get into a class for, what was it? I was supposed to do whatever Billy Theodore did. He was my cousin, and my mother, who was from Tulsa, just said, whatever, because Billy's from New York. So whatever Billy does, you do. So Billy's like went to Harvard. So Billy just kept doing things, and I would try to keep up with him. But since I had no memory, so this became a problem. And I like when I went to Oberlin, my roommate was a director named Greg Mosier, who later became a really important director, and he would cast me in parts like the dead body. So I would be dead in the first scene. I wouldn't even have to say, "Oh, I'm dying" or anything, because he wasn't even sure about that. And then I would just lay dead the whole time, and then I was okay with that. But for some reason, even now when we do these, like we did a show at BAM this week, and it involved 4 or 5 chapters of a television show. I had seen those chapters 3 or 4 times when we were originally looking at this television show. I saw them again when we did a radio piece about it, and now it's time to do a theater piece about it. And I looked at this thing that happened on the television. I said, "That's wonderful, she's great." And they all look at me and they say, "What?" I said, "That's great, that woman's great." And they said, "You said that she was horrible the last time." I said, "What last time?" I have no recollection at all. And so then they played me a totally articulate, deeply convincing, and rather intimately well-spoken version of something that I clearly had seen, but had completely erased. So in addition to having a fantasy issue, I also have my memory is very spotty and has been since I've been like 4. So the world I live in is not an ordinary world, as Jad would be happy to tell you. Because we get into these situations where he looks at me in the middle of a sentence and says, "You must be kidding." I said, "No." "What pencil?" He said, "The pencil you're holding in your hand." So, "Oh," I say, totally surprised. So he's had the burden of this So I'm sure he would tell you if you asked. But yes, I live through a filter.
And quite intently, too.
Yes. And sometimes it's hard. One time at NPR, it got really difficult because I have, in addition to that, I don't know why I'm making this my mental health description, but I also have a tendency to take on the accents of the people that I'm talking to. So I was put on probation at the Texas State Fair at NPR because I began talking like a Texan. And then one day, the President of the United States had just nominated a man with a really complicated name I loved saying, Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was going to be the...
This was under Jimmy Carter?
Yes. So he was going to be the national... something very important. And Judy Miller was the reporter at NPR. So you want to interview him with me? I said, what's his name? He says, Zbigniew Brzezinski. I said, sure. Zbigniew Brzezinski. Already I'm beginning to become Polish. Right? So I sit down at the table and we start to talk back and forth. And Judy starts to get alarmed, looking kind of gray in the face. And then through these glass things, all these people with ties start showing up. And NPR was very young then, like just starting. And to have a person of this rank, this was like the Secretary of State. This was the National Security Advisor or something big, important.
It was a big get.
He was a big get. And so I'm just talking, and now the room is filling. And so Judy writes in lipstick, "Stop it," and slides it across the table. I don't know what. Apparently, I'd started saying, "Where are you from?" Because I'm from Łódź. I said, "Łódź?" Yeah, it's a town in Poland. She said, "Down in Poland." And within about 10 minutes, I was thick with the Polish. So I was going, so you have a whole issue here, don't you? Of whether, like, Judy thinks like I'm making it into a satire program. I just had no idea. So then I was actually put off the air for 6 months and had to be editor. I mean, now I think they just throw you out the window, I guess. But it was always interesting. It was, that's the silly parts. The not so silly parts was that it was because I did have issues processing information. I was always a little bit slower. I'm not stupid or anything. When I went to law school, which I did do, met my wife and all that, I did very well in law school. I did very well in college. I got good grades.
But that seems so crazy given everything you've said. I mean, not only did you go to law school, you went to Columbia Law School.
Right.
So how did that? If you have no memory, how do you ace your courses?
So I drew. In order to put things into my long-term memory, I drew all the fact situations. I cartooned. If you looked at my textbooks, my wife is very fast. Even among the fast, she's fast, and her family is faster. So we would be sitting at her house, and her dad would say, "Robert, do you mind if we go abstract for a second?" Meaning, we're going to talk Turkish or something? Like, I can't talk. And I'd say, "I can go abstract." And they would, all six of their eyes, Roger, my brother-in-law, Tamar, and David, my father-in-law, they'd all look at each other, and then they'd start to talk. And here's what I'd hear. I didn't know what they were saying.
You couldn't keep up.
I couldn't even catch the tail of the kite. But the truth about the world is that most people in it aren't that fast. Most people in it don't have that much information. Most people in it can't process that quickly. Most people in it are more like me, weird as I am, than like them. It's wonderful to be that smart and that quick, but it's a rarity. And at a certain point, I realized that what other people might describe as a learning disability was actually, for me, a huge advantage. And if I could figure something out with my sense of pace, that is actually the learning speed of most people in the world who aren't interested in something. If you're really interested, sure, you'll pick it up. But if you aren't, then you need to hear not just the beginning and the end, but all the middle. And I turned out that I have a talent for the slow middle. And pretty much from the beginning in television and radio, that's all I've done ever since. The first job I ever did was a self-assigned one where the president was being impeached, and I just asked stupid questions that I thought anyone normal would ask. Not a person going to Columbia Law School. And I did go there, and I did pass and everything. But I never forgot what it was like to be not there. I can do that. I can compartmentalize. So I would say, well, when you're impeached, did you go to jail or something?
So you can remember what it was like to not know certain things.
I can remember now. I can remember. Jad can do this too. We can sit, having written it all, and knowing everything that's in it and what led to it and all the mistakes and all the refinements, and we could still look at it as if we were virgins and had never seen it before.
Really, because I've often wondered about that, because what comes through on the show is that spontaneity between you two, and that is sort of the heart of what makes it work so well, and yet it's so highly refined, obviously, because you must work on it so much.
It's funny. That is one of those things you can't really order at a store. Somewhere along the line, very early on, it became clear, first of all, that he has an exquisite sense of timing. That's obvious. And that he uses it to invent all kinds of beats and parses and rhythms underneath speech. But it was almost as if we were both musicians in some sort of tight jazz group or something. I can play with him musically totally easily and always have been able to. And it came in right at the beginning. And it's funny, there are times when I'll go on like Morning Edition or something, and so they'll be with Steve and the other co-host, and they're trying to be friendly and do banter. But it comes down to, and this would be true of musicians or athletes who are working in tight teamwork. If you're on a basketball court and you have a second in which to make one of three decisions, if, as they say, you're in the zone, it kind of comes easy to you. You almost have time to consider each one, and you don't feel panic. You just do the right one.
Time slows down in a way.
Time slows down. And in music, it's similar. You are carried on each other's rhythms, and you can join them, feel them, amend them, and do the next thing together without understanding how you got into that unity. It's a musician's kind of thing, and we both went to a very musical school.
And I guess it's one of those things that you can't really force that much. It either sort of jives or it doesn't jive.
Yeah. And I think that and a kind of warmth, which we just have, is the real secret of the show. And without all that much regard to what we're talking about, I think people hear two people having a good time and kind of winging it in some way. Like they're getting off on each other in some friendly musical kind of way. And that's just fun to sit next to. And I do not know how that happened. It happened to me before. I had it with Susan Stamberg, who's an NPR person. I had it with Harry Smith, who's at CBS. And I didn't have it with people whom I tried to have it with, but it's not something you can do because you want to. It's just you do it because it happens.
Well, I want to come back to sort of the art of reporting and Radiolab too, but I just want to go two steps back to, well, first the decision to go to Columbia. I mean, because everything you've said up to this point, it seems so obvious that it's in your bones to be doing the sort of work you're doing now and that you've done throughout your life. And yet you go to law school.
Well, because
how did that end up happening?
First I saw this movie where there was Gregory Peck played a character in a story, and I loved the character, and I thought he was doing something remarkably powerful, and there was this whole system set up.
So was it a way to sort of like fight for what's right type thing? You had
I
that,
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never wanted to just be famous or rich kind of thing. Although, like there was a period when a lot of the Miss America beauty contestants would want to be Barbara Walters, but I think they wanted to be Barbara Walters because they wanted to be powerful and beautiful and famous and fabulous. I just wanted to explore. I've had it's amazing, but I've had about 40 years of waking up pretty much every morning and getting to follow some thought that I had. I was self-assigned for the entire time. I never once had a job where they said, here's what you're going to do today. And that isn't easy to get at the beginning, the middle, or the end. It requires a kind of crazy imagination. And the thing about law school was it was everything but that. It was analytic, which I wasn't particularly good at. It was very rational, which I wasn't particularly. It was very ambitious as a profession for power, which I didn't have that much. And I've always thought that in order to discover who you are, it's often interesting to try to figure out who you're not, and to throw yourself into the bathtub of them in order to find out what there is really there that's you. And I made very good friends there. I married the woman who was sitting a couple of seats next to me. I enjoyed the exercise very much. But when I took my first job, and I got this great job with this guy who was Cole Porter's roommate in college and had invented theater law and ran this kind of small shop in this fancy firm, and I loved him. Fair to say, I fell in love with all kinds of people all the time, Jad, everybody. But this guy I just adored, and he took me aside one day and said, "You don't want to do this. You're not really going to be good at it because you're too into yourself. And this is a service business. I mean, most of the people you meet in the law are one-time wonders. You know, they invented flowers by wire, and then they make stupid decisions for the rest of their lives, but they're rich and they can afford you, and you clean up after them for the next 30 years, and that's your job. And there's nothing very exciting about that.
He was that frank with you?
Yes, he was. We became very good friends. So, I mean, that's the other thing. I think if you know how to like people, and my mom was good at that too, and my dad too. If you know how to like people, in a business that can be very cruel, I mean, ABC News was a really tough place. Roone Arledge ran it in the weirdest way. He had Diane Sawyer and a team of bookers and hungry reporters. He had Connie Chung and another team of bookers and another team of reporters. And he had Barbara Walters with another team of bookers and another team of reporters and 3 airplanes and 3 executives and 3 thises and 3 that. And they triple up. And if somebody was important on Tuesday, all 3 groups ran at them. And biting was allowed. And it was a tough, hard place. And I walked in there. They had wonderful resources. They had incredibly interesting people there. And I was, doing animation. Peter Jennings didn't want cartoons in his newscast. But I said, no, we'll do them. And I would just go find. And what you find is that if you know how to befriend and you know how to protect your friends, then your friends will protect you. And if you love what you do, then some combination of being stubborn for your pleasure and able to share your pleasure, not just with your audience, but with the people you work with, that gives you a coat of armor, like a suit of armor.
And you certainly give you a lot of resilience.
And resilience. Well, I mean, it's hard. There were days, I remember one day, it was the Gulf War, the first one, there were 52 reporters where I think that was at ABC. And Peter Jennings sat at the middle of the room, and the way the day went was, as the invasion began, the director would say, here is the reporters who are ready for you. And he had reporters on hillsides and reporters embedded and reporters in tanks and reporters with generals and reporters with Baghdad and reporters in his place and that place and the other place. And some of them were being shot and some of them were in the sand and some of them were inside tanks. Mine were just my kind of story. So I said, this is a tank offensive. I've discovered that Sherman tanks get 1 mile per gallon. They're going to drive 140 miles to go to this war. They get 1 mile per gallon. They can't have a huge tank because if it gets hit by a missile, they'll all die in a fire. So they have normal-sized tanks, not much gas, and they burn it up. So how do they get to the war they're going to? These are the kind of things that always occur to me. So they would say, okay, Peter, we have Ted Koppel on the Hill. We have someone with General Schwarzkopf. We have this. We have the Krulwich thing about the fuel. And all day long, he says, no Krulwich. No Krulwich. There's got to be so many that all over the building, when he would say no Krulwich, like the whole newsroom would laugh. I was sitting in the elevator, and it was a no Krulwich day all day long.
So you were in the studio ready to give your hit.
It was yeah. And so and when I got into the elevator with him like 3 a.m, he said, okay, that was not a nice day for you. He says, but you have to understand something. He said, you're weird, and we can afford one of you. And this is a day when we're doing our real business. We're going to war. And I'm a musical conductor, and I am playing the music of ABC News. and you don't fit in on a real day. On another day, you're a luxury. We can keep, but not today. So I walked out onto the street, and I thought, well, that's not so nice to hear. But I thought also, the subjects I chose were the right ones. They are the ones I wanted to talk about. Had they run those, they would have been the only network to explain how a tank gets to a war. I'm sorry they didn't, but I would do the same thing tomorrow if the war was starting tomorrow. You just have to decide that you are who you are, and live with the consequences. And that takes a certain kind of hardness. But if you can do that, then you can live free.
Because it occurs to me that you must have encountered this idea a lot throughout your life. I imagine it was something you bumped up into in like high school and at university. And I mean, it seems like a weird dynamic between like being yourself and I guess not internalizing it and still having that confidence and being able to do both at the same time.
Or maybe it's that, like it happens so frequently that maybe I just choose. Like when I was at Pacific, which is kind of a lefty place, I was very conservative. When I'm at NPR, which is a more conservative place, I think I'm more lefty. If I'm at a bend place, I'm straight. I seem to always be whatever they don't want.
And was that hard at first?
I think it must come with my DNA or something. At a certain point you think, why are you doing it? It's just, I think maybe I feel most comfortable if I'm not included in the group, perhaps, and just on the edge of it.
But early on, was it hard?
Was it hard?
To feel like you did belong? You weren't like part of...
it started at Pacifica. Whatever you might say about left-wing people, they don't have great senses of humor. And I was doing all these funny things. And one day, the guy from KPFK, which is the Pacifica station in LA, he was Australian. He was so mad at something that I did, and I still remember because we recorded it, he recorded it, and we played it over and over and over, and it was, and you could hear his jugular vein bulging in his neck. The news is not funny, Bob. The news is not funny. And he hated me. And I thought, yeah, it is sometimes. Sometimes it is. And somebody at NPR, I was writing about something, and she said, this is disgusting, insupportable, and an embarrassment to all of us. I said, no, actually, it's just a joke. And most people will read it as a joke and hear it as a joke. But that particular part of the world that is literal and likes literal is never going to go away. You don't expect it to. And in a way, you kind of count on it to be there. Because those were not nice words, but she had no fact that she could argue with. I listened for that. She just didn't like the tone, and she didn't like the silly conclusion that I came to, which was clearly silly to anyone normal. So I use that kind of, the chemistry of that kind of thing to just sort of keep my bearings. So yeah, it's hard, but it's also, I've now adjusted to it, and I almost need it.
You need sort of the resistance almost.
Yeah.
Because it tells you you're on the right track or what?
So, yeah, where I want to be anyway. I don't know if there's a right track. I mean, honestly, like Robert Siegel from All Things Considered is a very good friend of mine, and he's just a terrific reporter. And I met him, actually, he was playing Story Lady. He was doing, there was a children's show called Bullwinkle, Rocky and Bullwinkle, and he used to do those. He's now a very serious person.
I know one of the voices, you mean?
He was doing the voices. I know that he's a serious person, and he is a serious person. He can also do Rocky and Bullwinkle. So can Ted Koppel. Like Ted Koppel was Johnny Carson was one of his good friends, and he would do all kinds of spoofs from Beyond the Fringe and stuff until the light went on, and then he was Ted Koppel. And there are people who want to be a certain kind of person, and I think I respect that, particularly when it is who they really are. And Siegel, Koppel, Jad, these are people who know their hearts and who are unembarrassed by them. And you learn as you do this, like Scott Simon, who I used to edit. For him, almost everything was a moral question. He wanted, are you good, are you bad? For Ted, he hated a lie. So if anyone were to lie, a prime minister on a good day, But anybody. I was in parks with him where some guy would come up and ask him for money when he was going to use it for crack. And Capo would like rip the lie out of, you're not going to use this for lunch. You're not going to use this for lunch. You'd have the guy confessing that he wasn't going to use it for lunch. Because he is an inquisitor and he hates a lie. And I'm the kind of person who wants to know how you get the tank to the war. Like, what is that? That is your voice at the end of the day. But it is also a confession of yourself. And when you get there, when you say, here I am, then you're home. And that's the kind of reporting you do. And you try not to be too embarrassed by it, but you try to do it as well as you can. And you have good days and bad days. But at least you know why you're at work.
I just want to quickly get the actual beginnings of your career in journalism. You mentioned WBAI, the Pacifica station here in New York. That was your sort of first break. So
Right.
You graduate from law school. You're in this firm. He sits you down and says, listen, this isn't what you really want to be doing.
Right.
How did you react? Did you agree with what he was saying? Did you feel like, yes, I don't fit in here?
Well, it turns out they made me an offer anyway to join the firm. But the guy said, I'm going to give you an offer, but it will only be acceptable in a year. You have to wait a year to take it. The offer is not. He said, and I'm doing this as a gift to you and to your parents. And it was an enormous gift. So I had a year with a really fancy job at the far end. I didn't have any debt for Columbia because it was still cheap. It was $3,000, and I had paid most of that because I had worked before. So I was not in the modern problem where I already owed $60,000 and I was already owing, I had to come up with $700 every month for somehow. I didn't have that. So I could do whatever I wanted. So my father said, you take the bar exam. So I did. And coming out of the bar exam, I walked out and I had my impeachment tape, which I had done as a sportscast for some reason, which answered 12 questions that regular people would ask.
So you had made your own tape of...
I made all different voices.
You were acting a journalist again, even though you didn't have a job?
I don't know if it was a journalist, because a journalist might not do a sports tape of talking to himself in the voice of Howard Cosell. But I had researched all of the questions, so I knew, the president is actually going to be accused of a crime. Who accuses him of the crime? The U.S. Senate. 100 people. How do they do that? They say it in a chorus? No, they hire a lawyer. Who's the lawyer? And who defends the president? He has a lawyer. And who judges the case? The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Do they do it in the Supreme Court? No. They do it in a room with all the senators. If I were in trial and 20 of the jurors went out to play gin rummy, they wouldn't allow. Can you tell a senator that he couldn't? No, the senators can do anything they want. They don't even have to be at the trial? No. What happens if some important piece of evidence and then the jurors aren't there? Well, that's just the way it is. These were just normal, does the judge wear robes? Yes.
So let me get this straight. This was a tape that you made after the
law library, researched all these questions. I asked myself the questions, answered them, and then instead of going to a law professor or interviewing anybody, I just played all the parts. I was Mr. Know-It-All or something.
And what was the purpose of this?
Oh, the purpose of it was to make me into a star, of course. And I thought that I would take this tape of me talking to every radio station. They would all hire me because it was a great idea and I knew what I was talking about.
So this was in that year off then?
Yes.
That you decided consciously, okay, well, maybe I'll try my hand at actually reporting.
Right. So then I go to the radio stations and I say, here I am. And they said, every single one of them, well, that's a great idea. We'll just get a law professor. And why did you do it like Howard Cosell? And what is all this sports music and everything? So
you would literally take this tape explaining sort of complex ideas as a play almost, and then take it to different stations around the Northeast?
And at one point, I took it to Sandy Sokolow at CBS. It was the CBS bureau in Washington. This is when CBS was the Tiffany's network. Sandy knew my dad. So he calls my dad, and then he calls up Fred Graham, who was the leading legal reporter on television, and Leslie Stahl, who was someone I knew anyway. And he said, I'm taking you to lunch, Robert. And then he had Leslie and this famous legal guy tell me to go and be a lawyer. And Sandy said, be a lawyer. Don't be in journalism. You can't be in journalism when you're doing sportscasts in funny voices. No one will allow that.
Sorry, who's saying this to you?
The bureau chief of the CBS News and Walter Cronkite's #2 guy, executive producer of the show.
And and they knew your dad somehow, or how did they come to?
He married a Krulwich. Sandy Sokolow married my father's cousin.
And so they sat you down and said, "You're nuts. This isn't going to work."
Well, my father thought I should go to law school. Sandy thought I graduated law school. Sandy said to me, "What is wrong with you?" I said, "Nothing." I said, "Look, you wanted to go to law school." He was a Marine, fought in battle after battle in World War II, couldn't afford law school, and I had gone to law school. He said, you're disappointing your parents. How dare you? And I'm bringing these famous people in to tell you that you're a spoiled brat. So I'm sitting at this table, and Leslie and Fred are looking a little uncomfortable. They've been recruited into this thing. And I said to Sandy afterwards that was really not fair. And I think that you're just trying to make me into your son, and I'm not your son, so I'm not going to do. And I think that was the moment where I decided I'm absolutely fucking going to do this, come hell or high water, because I'm not having this power play, And then, you know what? 2 years later, he was asking. I was at NPR, and then all of a sudden, I was doing economics, nothing to do with law. But now he's calling me and says, "Would you like a job over here?" And I went on yeah. Yeah, I thought yeah, now you come.
After he staged an intervention.
Yes. So that's just one of those things. But to this day, Sandy's kids, I know. Sandy's grandkids, I know, and they all live here in New York, and so I don't fault him. He was scared for me. And it's not like how many people get to play in this business? He brought me into this room where there was this guy who was the assistant bureau chief, and the guy didn't know me at all. Didn't know that Sandy knew my dad or anything like that. Didn't know that I knew anybody. They closed the door, and Sandy says, "I'm just telling them what you think." And the guy says, "I'm going to tell you something, kid. We have hundreds of people coming in here dreaming of being reporters. And a big wind blows. And they all blow out the door. Once every 10 years, someone hangs on to the furniture and gets to stay. Once every 10 years. Nice to meet you." And I thought, I am the one. I'm going to stick to the chair. We're actually thinking that.
That you're going to stick to the chair.
Yeah, I feel this guy's he was giving me some kind of average. He said, you're going to fail? And I said, no, I'm not going to fail. I finally found something I want to do, and I'm going to do it.
And it worked. I mean, as soon as you got with WBAI, I was looking at the timeline of your career, and it's incredible. Within 2 years, you were the Washington bureau chief for Rolling Stone, and then before you know it, you're at NPR. And I mean, once you made the move, it really worked.
I think there's probably in heaven, in the journalism part of heaven, there is a angel who stands around. If you are stubborn about your passion, that angel gets up to God and he whispers, he says, "That one's stubborn. He holds on to the furniture." And then God says, "He will stay.
So do you think that's a general lesson? Is that what you would tell people?
I'm telling you, I'm giving you a religious observation here, that God likes a stubborn young journalist. Lately, God has been making them stay longer and longer and longer and longer. So God is testing harder, I think, these days.
It goes from 1 year to 10 years.
Like on your 15th internship, where you're finally getting to sharpen the pencil of the assistant anchor.
If you were starting out today, do you think you would have made it through? Do you think you were?
Oh no, I think so, and I see it. I see the new, more modern versions of what I did. In the science side, there are people who just actually the Carl Zimmer, the people who are actually Ed Young, Carl Zimmer, Henry Reich, all these people that I hang out with now are him. These are people exactly like that. They don't give up. They just go and go and go, and it takes some in the not in Jamie's case, but in the other cases, like those people just had to. They went home to their houses and they made their business at home. And, they took insulting amounts of money for blogs and basically, campaigned for each other. Like you won't find an Ed Young Best Stories of the Week that doesn't mention Carl Zimmer. And Carl Zimmer will find every opportunity to say nice things about Ed Young. And they just watch each other's back and they just climb rung by rung by rung in some kind of group effort. Because they don't trust companies to help them. They trust each other. I think that's the way it works now. Is you bond and you walk in a kind of brotherhood and sisterhood kind of. And that actually seems to work because there's such chaos now with all the business models being so awry. And if you're willing to work for $40,000 or $35,000 or $25,000 for a little while, until you can get something like a living wage a little bit later. If you're willing to do that...
It's a long tunnel, though.
It is. It is. And, and perhaps very, very talented people get thrown out the window along the way, for sure. But that funny combination, which existed when I started and still exists today, of people... I mean, there was a moment with Jad where he was doing something a little bit beyond his reach. He was on an FM radio station describing Richard Strauss and the Ring Cycle. It was fraught because the audience was smarter, even as much as he loves music, the audience was smarter than he about this composer. And in trying to balance both his sense of the music, his sense of his ability, and all these other things, he nearly went crazy. There was a period. But he wanted it so badly. You see that in someone. You see, what is it? It's almost like an ache. You see that, and you know that you're going to watch somebody, for better or for worse, he's going to get to the other side, or she. And I've seen that a lot, in different people, very different people. Barbara Walters is probably the best one I've ever seen. I mean, she's like relentless, and you may not always admire everything she does, but I've never seen anybody work so hard from the beginning to the end. And these people are here crazily large amounts of time, and it's not like they're lonely. It's like they actually kind of. I mean, they are. It's sort of a stupid way to live, but it is also pleasant in some part of them. It suits some need. And it's lucky to be that crazy, I think. Not all spouses of these people agree, but I think it is.
Well, just to end off, I mean, you've been reporting now for decades and explaining complex ideas and making them simple without simplistic. I mean, you've been doing this for decades now, and it seems as the viewer and the listener that you're as alive as ever. Does it still feel as fresh to you?
Because I'm as dumb as ever. Like, this is the thing, is like things keep happening and I still don't understand why. So yes, I wake up every day.
That's as genuine as that search?
It is actually genuine, yeah. Like my wife, she understands things so quickly. She doesn't understand how hard it is to understand anything. And I'm sorry that she doesn't. She misses out on that part. She's just very smart, so she gets it. I think it's funny, but there's something wonderful about not getting it and then hoping, and that funny little reward you get when you finally think that maybe you understand. In my case, it only lasts for a day because the next day I don't remember what happened the day before. But
you get to do it all again.
Yes, I get to do it all again. Yeah, so the reason it feels fresh is because it is fresh to me for some reason, and I guess I will. I don't know. I mean, I have to think a little bit about stopping. I'm getting older. And there are other people who need their space that's opening up and needs to be opened up. I don't want to be one of those people who sits on top of everybody for too long. But for as long as I'm doing it, it's the real deal. I am honestly surprised by what I learn every day.
And it seems like it's kept you young. I mean, the process of learning and you still seem to have that almost youthful exuberance.
Yes, there was a time I had occasionally have to do real reporting, and I remember once I was at a press conference for the person who had just been nominated for vice president of a major party, and I had to drive from JFK Airport in a car. I was in the first half hour of All Things Considered, and I was in traffic, and I was trying to compose what I was going to do. And Ira Flater was on the phone saying, "Get here, get here, get here!" And Manoli Weatherbill was waiting, and I hadn't written anything down. And I remember thinking to myself, "I'm losing 2026 right here. There's a year I'm not going to live for because of this. I am dying inside. There are scissors in me cutting off my lifespan. I've got to get back to explaining things, because if I have to do this real journalism, I'm not going to make it to 34. I'm going to be dead," because I was so scared.
And so you found a way to do it, to keep that sense of play.
Watching a person playing any lifelong game of hooky so they could stay alive. That's essentially the business plan for me.
Well, your sense of fun and enthusiasm certainly comes through, and I have to say it rubs off on the viewers. It makes hearing you on the radio a lot of fun, and I think you picked right. Robert Krulwich, thanks so much for joining me.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. You're welcome.
Well, that's all for this episode of Radio Waves. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts on the program or the interview with Robert you just heard, you can reach me at kevin@radiowaveshow.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. You can also find us online. Our website is radiowaveshow.com, and you can find us basically anywhere that audio is available. We're on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and if you listen to us through iTunes, if you could give us a rating or write us a review, it would really help us out. Radio Waves is still young, and we need help spreading the word. Our logo was designed by Joseph Nowak. Our theme song features music by The Years and was found at the Free Music Archive, and the closing credit music is by Poddington Bear. I'm Kevin Caners. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.